Hey there, this is Jacques from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to the first day of Conspiracy Take the Crown previews. Now, last Wednesday we saw the first and only card previewed from the set. Today, the first day of the official previews, we have 19 cards to look at, so quite a few here. Now, a few side notes about this set in case you're not familiar with it. The original Conspiracy, much like this one, kind of had the same rules. These cards will not be legal in Standard or in Modern, unless they are reprints that are already legal in those formats. If they're new cards, they will not be legal in those formats. They will, however, be legal in Eternal formats, so Vintage, Legacy, Commander, Cubes. The cards are all good there. There are a few exceptions. We'll talk about that as we get going. We also have some new mechanics to look at today. So we're going to take a close look at some of the mechanics that are involved in this set as well. Overall, I really enjoyed the first Conspiracy product. It was a great limited format, and it appears that this is on the right track of really going in the same direction. So I'm very excited about this set. Let's jump in. First, we're going to look at a token, and not one of the 19 cards. But this is the Monarch Token. Now notice there's a typo on this token, and it has been confirmed by Mark Rosewater that it will be printed this way as well. At the beginning, should be of your end step, draw a card. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, its controller becomes the Monarch. Now, we're going to see some cards where this is going to hopefully start to make a little more sense in just a moment, but there's a mechanic that makes you the Monarch, and there's a few different ways to get this token to become the Monarch. One way is you get a card that says you are now the Monarch, and we're going to see some of those as we get going. And basically, if someone else is the Monarch, you take it from them and you become the Monarch. If nobody's the Monarch, then this token would come into play under your control for the first time. Now, another way to get it is to attack the Monarch with a creature and do combat damage. So if you do combat damage via a creature, then you would take this and become the Monarch. Another way is if the person who's the Monarch gets out of the game. So if it's your turn and that person who was the Monarch, say, loses the game or concedes or what have you, you then become the Monarch. If it's their turn when it happens, then it just goes to the next person in turn order. So those are the ways that you get this card, and there's the pretty big benefit to it. First off, you get to draw an extra card on your end step. That's kind of awesome. And then there's also going to be more cards in the set that will maybe buff if you have this particular token out. So you'll get some bonuses on maybe some other cards at different times. Now, having said that, let's get into some of our new cards. I'm going to start off with the Conspiracies. Now, here's our first Conspiracy. If you're not familiar with this card type, we saw this in the original Conspiracy set, and these are cards that are only draft legal. So unlike the other new cards, like I just mentioned, that would be legal in Legacy and Vintage, Conspiracy cards won't be. These will only be legal in basically your cube drafts or the limited format for Conspiracy Take the Crown. It won't be usable in Commander either. Now, having said that, something new that we didn't see last time around is some of these Conspiracies will actually have a color attached to them. This one, Assemble the Rank and Vial, is actually black, so that's kind of a new twist. Last time they were all colorless. This time we will see some that are colorless and some that have color identity to them. This one in particular is a hidden agenda. That means that you start the card in your command zone face down. Now, a normal Conspiracy, you would start it in your command zone face up at the beginning of the game, so you don't actually cast it or play it. The other thing to make note of is this does not count towards your 40 card minimum deck size. So if I have 39 cards in this, I have an illegal deck. I actually have to have 40 cards, and then any Conspiracies I use above and beyond that have to be not part of that 40 card count, if that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about this card in general. Start the game with this Conspiracy face down in your command zone and secretly name a card. You may turn this Conspiracy face up anytime and reveal the chosen name. Creatures you control with the chosen name have, when this creature dies, you may pay black. If you do, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield tapped. So the thing with these Conspiracy cards, and even some other cards in the set, they're going to ask you to make note of something. Basically, you have to write that down on a piece of paper and conceal it. That's what you're going to do with this card as well. So having said that, it's a pretty good Conspiracy. This one's a common Conspiracy. They do come in different levels of rarity. Common ones usually don't have quite as big of an impact as, say, a mythic one that we're going to see here in a few minutes. But this is actually pretty good as long as you have a few cards that are the same card. So maybe you drafted a few of the same common. This could be just fine for you in certain situations, as long as you're playing black and you have black mana for it. It's also good if you have ways to maybe recur your creatures back to your hand from the graveyard and maybe cast something a few different times. Now, we haven't seen enough of the set to really know if that's going to be a thing in Conspiracy, but if you make a cube, this could fit into your cube, for example, even with some cards from Eldritch Moon. There's a lot of cards that come back from the graveyard in that set. So yeah, it definitely can find some value in certain situations here. Next we have Hold the Perimeter. Now this is a colorless Conspiracy. This one's a rare, and this one will start face up in your command zone at the beginning of the game. At the beginning of your first upkeep, put a 1/2 white soldier creature token with Defender onto the battlefield. At the beginning of each other player's first upkeep, that player puts a 1/1 red goblin creature token onto the battlefield with this creature can't block. So this is kind of a fun one. Basically what this is doing is it's giving you a blocker, and it's giving all your opponents these little 1/1s that can't block so that they can basically just attack each other. So it's just kind of a fun, chaotic way to start the game, and I like it. I don't know if it's going to be really that meaningful or that great, but I think it's just kind of a fun way to just almost ensure action right from the start of the game. And yeah, it might not give you a huge advantage, but maybe a few points of damage here or there. Certainly worth playing, I would say. Next we have a green one, Natural Unity. This one's a hidden agenda, so it starts face down in the command zone, and you also have to secretly name a card. You may turn this Conspiracy face up at any time and reveal the chosen name. Creatures you control with a chosen name have, at the beginning of your combat, on your turn, you may pay a green. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So it seems like green in general, from what we can see so far, is all about growth. There's some counter stuff going on. In fact, we're going to see a Monstrosity card coming up in a little bit. That mechanic is back, which is pretty cool. So this kind of plays into that, I guess. And again, it's only going to be good for you if you A, have green mana, and B, have a few cards of the same name. So again, these could be commons, or maybe if you do have a way to recur them, you might be able to get a little bit of value out of this one. Next, we have a mythic Conspiracy, Sovereign's Realm. Now, this one's a little crazy. Now, this starts the game face up in the command zone. Your deck can't have basic land cards, and your starting hand size is 5. Exile a card from your hand. This turn, you may play basic land cards from outside the game. Basic lands you control have tap and add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Okay, so let's talk about the upsides and the downsides of this card. And let's face it, if you draft this thing, you're going for it. I would go for it just because if nothing else, this just seems fun. Especially if you can get this like in pack 1 or something, right? Now, the upsides, you're able to basically draft any card you want. Doesn't matter what color it is, because in the end of the day, you're going to be able to tap your lands for all 5 colors. So you can truly draft that 5-color good stuff deck. Just take the best cards that come your way. There's going to be a huge advantage to that. Also, even though, yes, you do have to pitch cards to get land, you're still have basically a deck full of gas. You don't have to worry about drawing into lands in the late game. As the game gets longer, you're going to get more and more momentum, and you're going to be just drawing heat all the time. That's awesome. Now, the downsides are you're going to start off slow in the beginning of the game. You're going to have a hand size of 5 to start. Hopefully you don't have to mulligan, but you really shouldn't have to mulligan, right? Considering you can pitch your cards for lands anyway. And then your early steps are going to be about setting up your mana base. And you will have some probably bad cards in your deck, because you got to look at it this way. You have to have a minimum of 40 cards. In a normal draft, you draft like, 45 cards. So you're basically playing every card that you draft for the most part. And you do have to be careful that you make sure you draft enough cards, because if you draft Conspiracies, they don't count towards your deck minimum. And there's also a card we're going to see in a few minutes that allows you to draft a card and remove it from the game. So if you started doing that, then you might not have 40 cards, and you'd be in a weird situation where you just couldn't play this card, and you're going to have to make a real limited deck with whatever you manage to draft, which could be really awkward, right? So that's the downside to this card. But having said that, I think this is really powerful and really good. Okay, I start with a few less cards. I'm going to have to pitch some of those bad cards. Now, granted, like I said, you're going to have some bad cards in your deck, but if you can pitch those for lands, then who cares? And once you have your mana base, then you're good to go, and you're just set to rumble for the rest of the game. That's pretty crazy. So again, this could be fun in a cube. Definitely going to be very interesting in the limited format when it comes up. Summoner's Bond, and here's a uncommon one. This one's a double agenda, which means you're going to basically write two things down on the piece of paper. Start the game with this conspiracy face down in your command zone and secretly name 2 different cards. You may turn this conspiracy face up at any time to reveal the chosen names. Whenever you cast a creature spell with one of the chosen names, you may search your library for a creature card with the other chosen name, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. It's a nice way to cast one creature and go ahead and search up another one. So there's actually a fair amount of value to be had here. Even if you only trigger it once, there's good value. But again, if you happen to draft some commons with the same names, then you might be able to get a little extra value out of it. So it just depends on how your draft goes. But yeah, it's a decent conspiracy. It definitely gives you a chance to have a big turn. And now we've moved on to the normal cards of the set. Lieutenants of the Guard, 1 white and 4, human soldier, 2/2, and we have yet another new mechanic. This one's Council's Dilemma. When Lieutenants of the Guard enters the battlefield, starting with you, each player votes for strength or numbers. Put a +1/+1 counter on Lieutenants of the Guard for each strength vote, and put a 1/1 white soldier creature token onto the battlefield for each numbers vote. Now, there was a similar mechanic in the previous conspiracy, but that was a little different because basically everyone would vote on the effects, sometimes like hitting one creature or a card having a particular effect for that turn. This time around, it's almost like a cumulative vote where everybody's vote is going to cause something to happen, and that's the difference, and that's why it's called Council's Dilemma this time. I really like this card in the early game. If you're playing a big multiplayer game, you're going to end up with either a big creature or else a lot of little tokens or a little of both, and it's actually pretty good for 5 mana. Now later in the game, after some players have gone out, there's diminishing returns here where this card isn't going to be quite as good for 5 mana, and if you're only getting yourself like a 2/2 and a token, it's not super great for 5. So there's a little bit of risk involved in this card, but there also appears to be maybe some sort of tribal element, so this being a human soldier, that might matter as well. I guess we'll learn more as the week goes on. Right now, this is one of those cards that I can see in Limited, might not always make your cut, but if you're looking for a playable, it'll be fine. Next is Pollyana Vanguard. This is a white and 1 human soldier, 2/2, and you draft this card face up. This is a rare too, by the way. As you draft a creature card, you may reveal it, note its creature types, then turn this card face down. Other creatures you control of a type you noted for cards named Pollyana Vanguard get +1/+1. Okay, so a few things rules-wise let's talk about first and get out of the way. Now, even though this card specifically talks about drafting, you can still play it in any of the formats I mentioned earlier. So this is legal in Legacy, Vintage, and Commander, as well as Cube. Now, having said that, it's not going to be a real good card in those situations because since you didn't have a draft, it doesn't really have any ability. It's basically a 2/2 for 2, which, okay, there you go. Now, in Limited, where you're actually drafting, this is a very skill-intensive card. So you got to look at it this way. I draft this thing. Now I have to do this dance where I have to figure out, okay, I'm going to draft a certain tribe, and I don't want to reveal this too soon because then my opponent may cut me off from that tribe in the draft. But if I do it too late and I don't get another one of that tribe, then I missed my window of opportunity to get a bonus out of this card. And then you think that just maybe, now granted it's rare, you're not going to see it very often, but what if 2 of these go around in a draft, right? So this gets a little crazy. You have to be very thoughtful about how you're going to play this card in the draft, and I actually am very excited about that. I think that's awesome. Now you also want to keep in mind with this card that if you do play it in a cube, there are some weird combos you could do with it. Like imagine revealing a changeling, for example, then that would count as all creature types, which could be kind of interesting. Next we have Illusion of Choice. It costs 1 blue, it's an instant. You choose how each player votes this turn. Draw a card. At worst case scenario, this thing just replaces itself for 1 mana, so it's not a huge loss if you don't find a use for it. But if you find a use for it, this card is phenomenal. So we already saw one card where voting matters, and you could, for example, have a deck with that card and this in it, and you get to manipulate the vote any way you want. adds value to that previous card. It's also an instant, so if your opponent plays a card where everybody gets to vote, guess what? You get to influence that vote. So this is a very good card. It's kind of funny because it also has some interesting interactions with cards from the previous conspiracy where there was voting, things like Council's Judgment, where you can basically misdirect the Council's Judgment if you play this. So again, you're probably not going to see that in Legacy or Vintage, even though Council's Judgment did get some Legacy play, just not enough that you're going to take sideboard spots with this. But you could put this in a cube with Council's Judgment as kind of a counteraction to it. That could be sort of neat, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play in Limited. Journeying Homunculus, and we got yet another new mechanic. 1 blue and 1. This is 0/4 Homunculus, and when this enters the battlefield, you may goad target creature, which means until your next turn, that creature attacks each combat if able, and attacks a player other than you if able. So you're basically forcing your opponent to have one of their creatures that you choose attack somebody else. That's actually kind of cool. So I love the mechanic. Great mechanic for multiplayer games. I'm sure this will cross over and have relevance in Commander as well. But yeah, going to be great for Limited and even cubes. Archdemon Italiano. 2 black and 2. It's a demon, 5/4 with flying. And when you draft this, you draft it face up. As long as this is face up during the draft, you can't look at booster packs and must draft cards at random. After you draft 3 cards this way, turn it face down. So basically, you get a very powerful card. You get a 5/4 flyer for 4, which is phenomenal. But the drawback is you basically lose your next 3 picks. Now, you're still getting a pick, but it's just a randomized pick. You could think of this as Magic the Gathering Online demon, maybe. Sorry, didn't mean to take a jab at MTGO, but I had to. I couldn't resist. So here you go. You're giving up some picks. Now, you could get lucky and still hit some good cards, but I think it's worth it. I mean, even if I pick this first pick, okay, I'm giving up pick 2, 3, and 4. That's not great, but again, I might get lucky, at least on one of those picks, and even if I don't, got myself a 5/4 flyer for 4. Seems good. It's a rare. It's not going to show up all the time, but I think this will be great and Limited for sure. Capital Punishment. I just love this card. I love the quote and everything on it. 2 black and 4. It's a sorcery. It's another Council's Dilemma. Starting with you. Each player votes for death or taxes. Each opponent sacrifices a creature for each death vote and discards a card for each taxes vote. This is an interesting card. If you're behind, this is great. Your opponents are going to, at least in some frequency, have to sacrifice creatures and or discard cards, and that could help you catch up a little bit. Now, if you're ahead, you're already ahead, and it's kind of a dead card at that point, so it's not always going to be great for you, but sometimes it's just good to have cards like this, just a one of them in your deck in case things go wrong, and this will help you a little bit. Also might make some people upset with you, so you do have to think about some political backlash there, but it's a very interesting card. This will be really fun to play, I think, in Commander, as well as the Limited format. Alright, next we have a reprint, and this is actually the only reprint we've seen so far today, but it's a good one. It's Inquisition of Kozelek. 1 black is a sorcery. This time it's rare. Target player reveals his or her hand. You choose a non-land card from it with converted mana cost 3 or less. That player discards that card. Okay, so a few things to note about this. First off, in case you're not familiar with Modern in that format, Inquisition of Kozelek is a uncommon from Rise of the Eldrazi, and it was very expensive. And for a very long time, players really wanted to see a reprint of this card in a regular release set. And this is it. This is actually pretty awesome. Now, it is a rare. It's not an uncommon. However, this is not a limited set. This isn't like a Modern Masters or something like that. You're going to be able to get these cards pretty easily at your LGS. You'll even be able to buy packs at your Target and Walmart. So that's great for getting cards out into the environment. This is a card that really needed to get out into the environment. As far as flavor goes, I'm not really sure how Inquisition of Kozelek fits into this world. Probably doesn't, but you know what? That's fine, because this card desperately needed a reprint. Now, another thing you do want to keep in mind, a lot of the set is going to be reprints, and this is a very good indication of hopefully we'll get some awesome reprints. The first conspiracy had some great ones. Exploration was in there, as well as Stifle, Misdirection, Swords to Plowshares, Brainstorm. So I'm hoping for that type of quality of reprint, and we're going to see a lot of them. And maybe Conspiracy becomes a yearly thing. It almost becomes maybe like our new core set, where this is a way for these cards to get reprinted. That would actually be kind of sweet. We'll see what other reprints come out as the week goes on, but this is an amazing start. Besmirch, 2 red and 1. It's a sorcery. Until end of turn, gain control of target creature, and it gains haste, untap, and goad that creature. So this is a little bit of a twist on the threaten effect. Very reasonable at 3 mana. It's an uncommon, so you'll see it relatively frequently. You get to take a creature, attack with it, do what you want with it. As long as it survives, then it goes back to its opponent. But next time your opponent has their turn, they have to attack a different person with it. So you get a little more bonus for the 3 mana. That's actually really good. So this will be a fine card in Limited for sure. Crown Hunter Hireling, a red and 4. It's a 4/4 Ogre Mercenary, and when this enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch. And this can't attack unless the defending player is the Monarch. So this is really kind of a save the queen sort of card, where if you're the Monarch, it's going to be able to protect you, but it's not going to be able to attack. And bringing it into play makes you the Monarch, so that's kind of nice, because it almost pretty much guarantees you at least a card draw, if nothing else, as long as nothing strange happens on your turn. And then when you do lose the crown, now you have yourself a 4/4 attacker, and you get all this for 5 mana. I think that's really economical. This thing is at the common level, so it'll be easy to pick up one of these in the draft. I like this card. I think it's a very good common limited card. Deputized Protester, 1 red and 2, human warrior, 2/1 with menace, and yet another new mechanic, melee. Whenever this creature attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each opponent you attacked with a creature this combat. I kind of like this mechanic because it really enforces the gameplay of trying to attack multiple opponents, and it starts to create just slightly faster games. Sometimes multiplayer really drags on because no one wants to be the first to attack somebody and have to deal with their wrath, so everyone kind of builds up and builds up and builds up. But this is a nice way to try to encourage some early action and hopefully not get too many people upset with you, because you're kind of spreading the damage around. You're not just focusing on one person, and usually people are okay with that for the most part. I mean, if you're too aggressive, obviously everyone might team up on you, but for the most part, if you're not picking on one individual and you're just kind of giving everyone a few points of damage, they're usually all right with that, and there are some long-term benefits to that as the game goes on. So I do like the melee mechanic. I think that's actually very well thought out, and again, this is another real decent common for sure. Animus of Predation. This is interesting. So 1 green and 4. This is an avatar 4/4, and this is another one that you're going to draft face up. As you draft a card, you may remove it from the draft face up. Those cards aren't in your card pool. If you removed a creature card with flying from the draft with this card, then Animus of Predation has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, and Vigilance. This is actually pretty amazing. So I kind of alluded to this card a little bit earlier when we were talking about the conspiracies, but this is a fun card to really draft around. So I draft this thing. Now I have to really consider, like, are there small creatures in the set that maybe have some of these mechanics that I could just pitch and remove from the draft, as opposed to drafting them and then giving this more value? Or will actually having the smaller creatures with those mechanics be more valuable to me? So again, it's another very skill intensive draft card, but I really like this. I think this is a really cool idea, really cool theme. And I also like the special card borders they did for these kind of cards, these Draft Matters cards. I think those are awesome as well. Yeah, not too much more to say about it. I think this is a very good card. And notice it's an uncommon, so it's going to show up a fair amount, which is pretty interesting. Domesticated Hydra, 2 green and 2. It's a Hydra 3/3, and it has Monstrosity X for 3 green and X. If this creature isn't monstrous, put X +1/+1 counters on it, it becomes monstrous. And as long as it's monstrous, it has Trample. Again, I love the flavor text here, and the whole idea of a domesticated Hydra is incredible. And that's what I love about Conspiracy. I feel like this set, they can just kind of be a little goofier, a little funnier, a little looser than, like, I don't know, Innistrad or Zendikar, right? Like, you just feel like there's a lot more tongue-in-cheek kind of hijinks going on in these cards than we've seen in the last few years. And that's fun. I love that. I think that's really cool. So this card is a great uncommon draft card for sure. I mean, a 3/3 for 4 is okay, but the fact that later you can monstrous it, it's very good. Now, if you played with monstrous from the Theros block, you know that there is a downside where you might put a lot of resources into the card and then it just gets removed and doesn't feel good, but when you can pull it off, it's definitely worth the gamble. Alright, next is Knights of the Black Rose. 1 black, 1 white, and 3. It's a human knight, 4/4. And when this enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. Whenever an opponent becomes the monarch, if you were the monarch, as the turn began, that player loses 2 life, you gain 2 life. So that second part's not super exciting. I mean, your opponent's not going to care about being drained for 2. They're going to take the crown and be very happy with the card draw effect, if nothing else. But this is still a very economical card. I mean, paying 5 for a 4/4, and you get to be the monarch, again, almost guaranteeing you a card draw. I think that's pretty good for 5 mana. Again, great card, uncommons. You'll see quite a few of these floating around. Now for the last card of the day, it's a mythic, Queen Marchesa. Now this is a Mardu card, so she costs Mardu and 1. Human assassin, legendary creature, 3/3. Death touch and haste, and when she enters the battlefield, you become the monarch. At the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent is the monarch, put a 1/1 black assassin creature token with death touch and haste onto the battlefield. Okay, here's what I like about this card. First off, I think this is very strong. I think this is going to be a good card for Commander as well as limited formats. This is very affordable at 4. It's legendary, so it can be a commander. And she's all about keeping the crown and keeping card advantage. Now, she can rumble herself. She's a 3/3 death touch haster, so she can get in there for some damage. That's kind of awesome. On top of that, she gives you the crown when she comes into play, which is great if she's a commander, where she may come into play multiple times over the course of the game. And if you don't have the crown, she gives you the means to get it back. These little 1/1 assassin death touch tokens that your opponent might not want to block and might just have to give up the crown instead. That's incredible. She just does so much and really ensures that as the game goes on, she's going to get more card advantage than anybody else off that token. I love this card. Again, it's mythic. It's not going to show up a whole lot in drafts, but you'll be very happy to draft this when you get a chance. It is 3 colors. We don't know what color fixing is going to look like yet in the format, but a very good card. And like I said, I'd love to see this played in Commander. I think this could actually be pretty amazing. So having said that, those are the preview cards for today. We've seen 19 of them, so that's pretty awesome. As the week goes on, we'll be back every day with a video and talk about what else has been revealed and give you at least a little bit of a compilation and some quick analysis. So if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, definitely a great time to do so. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.